Tom Santuccio, Solution Architect with AWS. I've been working for AWS for, oh gosh, by about coming up on 2.5 years out of the Southeast, supporting enterprise customers as well as some digital native customers kind of born in the cloud, if you will. And yeah, here to help. If you know, I know I shared this deck with Ron. He will share it with everyone. But if you have any questions and don't know how to get in touch with your account team from AWS, feel free to reach out to Ron to get in touch with me, and I will get you in touch with your solution architect. So with that, I'm going to talk about lean and clean SecOps using AWS native services. However, native services can't answer everything. So, and I will touch on that throughout this deck as well. Alrighty, quick agenda here. The overall, I guess, in a nutshell, my goal today here, guys, is really just to give you a good checklist, if you will, to assist with embedding security into your deployments. So really, SecOps becomes easy. You know, it's a crazy concept, right? And the way we're going to do this is with what I call a layered approach, right? To build out this reference architecture. All right, so if we start with a layered security reference architecture, the outer layer really is compliance, right? So if you think about things like HIPAA, PCI, FedRAMP, at the end of the day, these compliance things that you have to adhere to, right, for your business, that's going to drive your architecture, right? Once you know what those compliance or audit requirements are and what evidence you need to provide, that's when you're going to basically get down to the next layer, right? The network, right? How do you get to your data once it's in the cloud? In an AWS world, right, or a cloud world, you're going to start coming up with how do I create those VPCs, hybrid networks, right? You have data centers most likely, right, that you're connecting to in a hybrid world or multi-cloud. So how do you design that? How do you design the edge security? How do you design network inside that VPC, meaning who's talking to what and how are you controlling that, the doors and the paths amongst those, right? Then we get down to really the infrastructure, right? The infrastructure layer. And that's where you're going to open up the gates to really let folks start deploying things, albeit, you know, VMs, virtual servers, various infrastructure components such as load balancers, storage, you name it, right? There's a lot of things you can deploy nowadays in the cloud. And you need to think about this from a security lens, right? Not just architecture. So how do I make sure the infrastructure I'm putting in here is secure? Is there any deviation from that? Has the state changed from your security posture, right? The standards that you put in place? And more importantly, how do you detect it if that happens? The next layer is the data, right? So obviously your gold mine, right? This is where your business intelligence data resides. This is what those bad actors are wanting to get after, right? Your data, right? And potentially, I think David touched on it, right? Ransomware at the end of his stack, right? This is what they want to get access to and then exploit it and possibly hold it for ransom for you guys. And then what do you do with that, right? Of course, you want to encrypt it everywhere at rest and in transit, but you also want to classify it appropriately, right? Do you know what's inside the data in different repositories or storage layers? Next layer, identity and access management, right? And in here, there's 4 principles. How do I secure my AWS access or any cloud for that matter? How do I control my server access, right? This is an infrastructure layer. How do I control my service to server access and the application itself? And last but certainly not least, is monitoring, right? You need that, I hate to use the word, right? Single pane of glass, but you need one way to see and get the visibility into the security and compliance of your environment. At the end of the day, once you get this stood up, right, you want to let your project teams have fun and not to slow them down where they go around IT, but you really have to have that visibility. And as a security team, you need to know, have a good view of what's happening. You need the ability to give your CISO at the end of the day, one place to see how things are looking, one place to go and give it the green, thumbs up, if you will. So the same diagram, but now we're bringing in native tools, right? And, we have all these in our platform. This does not include partner tools. I'm not going to read all these out. We're going to get into some of these later on. Typically, native integration means more agility. But however, I will say this, right? Based upon your requirements, you may require third-party tools, right? We have all these tools, but we also have a huge, robust marketplace. And we know customers, I have many enterprise customers that still have to use third-party tools based upon their requirements or compliance that they have to adhere to. So just want to make sure I call that out. Security is a long pole in the tent though, right? It can take forever to bootstrap because you don't know where to start, don't know if you're secure enough, right? So the purpose here, like I said earlier, we're going to give you a checklist that you do know your security posture and how good your security is. Then you decide if you want to bring in some commercial software or marketplace software to really take it to the next level. So framework, right? We have many frameworks that we support, that we adhere to, NIST, FedRAMP, like I mentioned earlier. But these compliance requirements, we're going to address those via a layered approach. The most common one that I see customers using these days, and overall AWS, I think we report greater than 50% of our customers are leaning towards the NIST Cybersecurity framework. So based upon that, the way I have this presentation lined up is to really use that layered approach as it aligns to NIST, right? So if you're familiar with NIST and CSF, right, there are certain pillars, if you will. There are certain pillars. You have identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover, right? So if we look at those, right, identify, this is where you want to make sure that network, infrastructure, IAM layer are all secure. You want to protect them with guardrails, which we'll look into in a little bit, and how to protect those initial layers. And then, of course, as I said earlier, right, how do you detect it, how to respond, and more importantly, how to recover when, not if, bad things happen, because we all know bad things happen. So to meet this is all native AWS tooling. These are the same tools we provided. I provided earlier on that slide. Once again, can be third party here. You plug in where you need, but this is doing exactly the same as our layered approach. You're just meeting requirements in this case, right? Aligning with the NIST framework. Using this layered approach, which will work for your auditors at the end of the day. You can prove that you're adhering to the standards and compliance you have to. You might have to tweak a few things, like mapping for auditors, but this has proved to work for many of our customers. So now let's get a little tactical and practical, right? Here's the checklist, right? This checklist becomes your reference guide to a security baseline reference architecture. You need to do this before you hand over the account, right? The landing zone, if you will, to the project teams, where they're going to go have fun with it and start deploying their resources and building things. So now let's see how we can check off some of these things using native services, right? If we start in the upper left, network security, we want to centralize VPC management, right? Then we want to address edge security, and that's where web application firewalls come in. You want to centralize it, push those rules from there to the edge sites, protect them with CloudFront distributions in front of your websites, use things like load balancers in front of your applications. And if it's centralized, it doesn't matter if you have 10 of them, 100 of them, or thousands of them, right? It just doesn't matter because you're pushing it from one central place and controlling it and monitoring it. And if further down the stack there, guard duty, right? This is our threat detection or machine learning-based intrusion detection to find out what's going on inside that VPC. Once again, one main account to control this. Have it enabled across all your accounts in a multi-account approach, right? And if you use a third-party IDS, IPS tool, based on your requirements, that's okay too, as long as you can still use this checklist, centralize control of it, and make sure it's pushed to all your accounts. Then we get down to that infrastructure layer, right? And this is where it all starts with in Amazon, if those folks familiar with AWS, right? AMIs, right? The Amazon machine image, right? You want a hardened AMI machine image or golden image, right? Term back in the day with VMware and such, as a source for all the virtual servers, right? A good source basically equates to good infrastructure or good DNA that you're putting into all of your applications. And once you have that golden AMI, people start launching these instances. You want one place to manage how they're doing vulnerability scans on it, as well as remediating any patches, right? So if they're not compliant, you have the ability to push a patch to it from one place, centralized. And IAM, right? You want a central place to manage identities, right? Whether you're federating with an Active Directory or another IDP, Okta, one login ping, or what have you, you want to be able to manage those roles, right? Because whatever IDP you're using, it's going to associate with IAM and AWS world. And you want to make sure that obviously the roles and policies are managed from one place. Without it, things can get out of control and you're not following the best practice of least privileges. And security operations, same thing here, right? Once again, the theme, one place, central location for your logs and visibility, right? To look into those and lock them down, right? So those logs cannot be tampered with. So how do we do that, right? It all starts with, you may have heard the term landing zone, right? A consistent way to create accounts and controls. You want to bootstrap those security, the controls, automation into all of your accounts. So it's a repeatable process. We used to call this governance. It was done with scripts back in the day. Since then, we've released a service called Control Tower. And it can be done either way, right? Both work. Many ways to skin that cat per se. But once you deploy that landing zone, you have these 3 core accounts underneath it, and you have a shared service account for things like Active Directory, your DevOps tooling. You have a logging account for the centralization of all those logs I mentioned earlier. But obviously the focus of this discussion, you have a security account, right? And this is where that central control is. There's just a key role to have all your services there that will be pushed out to many of your other accounts as you spin up new business units or what have you. So once you have that core structure, then you can create something called an account vending machine, right? And this is a service called AWS Service Catalog, also third-party products that can do something similar. We can start spinning up these new accounts, right, through this vending machine process. And takes care of bootstrapping the account with all those things that we have in that security account, right? Those controls around turning on configuration management, your logging, your threat detection, IDS, IPS type services. These are all things on that checklist, right? So start building it out here. And in a multi-account approach, right, it looks a little confusing when you throw something like this up, right? A lot of lines everywhere, but a lot of customers already have this. But if this was all done via that account vending machine type approach, whether you're spinning up dev accounts or prod, pre-prod, or different business units, right, HR or finance, if they're all done following that vending machine approach, well, then we're bootstrapping a lot of this information right out of the gate, right? So at least we know the landing zone, if you will, their little sandbox in the cloud at least has a lot of your standards, your security posture built in. Building a house, right? Good foundation. So now we look back, right? Come back to this. Now we're starting to get some checkboxes here, right? By addressing that first layer. So now let's talk about centralized infrastructure security. This is where we talked about that EC2 or the AMI, if you will, right? All starts with having a good AMI. So in 2019, I think it was, we launched what was called EC2 Image Builder. It's pretty cool, right? It supports both AWS and on-premise use cases, right? So Image Builder gives you a one-stop shop where you can create things in AWS, as well as if you're doing things like VMware, OVF, VMDKs, VHDXs, you can do that as well. It's also free. All you pay for is the underlying cost for the EC2 instance. But at the end of the day, what the service does is allows you to create a hardened and patched image. You can incorporate things like software you want to build into or any scripts you want to run upon spinning it up, and settings that are specific to your company, your security requirements. And then more importantly, you get to share this, right, with other accounts from that central location once again, right? So your project teams are now forced to use these AMIs. If you're using something called AWS Organizations, you have built-in integrations there where you can enforce policies that restrict accounts to only run VMs from this approved AMI. And if you're not using organizations, that's okay as well. You can do things like using AWS config, or if you're using another configuration management tool to really catch it, right? If someone spins up an AMI that is not based upon your golden image, well, more importantly, at that point, you want to catch it, detect it, and put it on your dashboard, right? Another cool thing about Image Builder, it allows you to, once you produce that final image, it also generates a recipe, right? And this recipe can then be used with any existing source code version control systems you have and CI/CD pipelines for repeatable automation, right? And this image pipeline is a construct of a recipe, configuration, distribution configuration, infrastructure configuration, and the schedule, right? That really dictate when that pipeline should run. So you can incorporate this into pipelines for any dev teams. And golden AMI is one thing, right? But there's also that long-term patching requirement, right? So patching in place, you want to centralize that as well, right? So you can see if servers are out of state. At that point, you can determine, well, am I just going to push a patch to this, right, via during a maintenance window, or do you want to follow a process where it gets blown away, right? Maybe you want those servers to only live. I have some customers that really want to blow away servers once a month and just have it redeploy and the app redeploy, just to make sure you're using the latest and greatest. And then you also want to incorporate things like, in this case, I have Amazon Inspector on there for doing vulnerability scans. Make sure you're addressing latest CVEs, not only for that operating system, but for packages that are installed to bring the two together. And just another view, a couple of these slides, I do have links in here. Obviously, I'll have this deck, and this is just another view showing using patching, where you can actually use patching for hybrid environments too. So if you're running something like a VMware on-prem, you have the ability to use this one tool to patch those as well. Macie, I had that on that other slide with Inspector. So what is Macie? For those that have not heard of that, this is our data lake detection service, right? It's based upon machine learning algorithms. People leak data, right? It happens. Keys get posted on GitHub and what have you. At the end of the day, maybe not encrypted, it happens, but Macie will catch that, right? It also has the ability to protect your PI data, right? Think credit cards, social security, phone numbers, or maybe some data that is just PI for you. You have the ability to go in and customize that as well. And similar to some of those other services, right? The theme, this can be done from one central place, that security account, so that all accounts are leveraging Macie to scan those S3 buckets. So now we have a lot of infrastructure done. I mentioned WAF earlier, that web application firewall. This would protect your edge, right? Those web applications, public-facing websites, mobile apps, you can attach to load balancers, what have you. But once again, centralized, being pushed to all different accounts as it gets stood up. So everyone that has a web-facing application or behind CloudFront, you can attach a WAF rule to that. If you are using organizations, you can leverage something like Firewall Manager to share rules across multiple accounts. Maybe you have a standard for your company, but you can create that standard and automatically any accounts that get stood up has that WAF attached to it. So now a lot more boxes checked off, right? We just got a couple left here. Looking good. So now monitoring. So monitoring, we have Security Hub, right? It's really the account that the hub of security, if you will, in AWS, meaning that all of our other security services roll up into this to give you that single view, determine if things are turned on that you want to be turned on at multiple layers, network, infrastructure, data. And you can use this to really see the posture of what's happening. You get a score, determine what score is good for you. It's not going to say 100 is perfect because you have certain things are acceptable in your company, may not be acceptable for other folks. The cool thing about Security Hub, it does have north and southbound integrations, meaning there's tons of third-party products and customers that feed into Security Hub from a receive standpoint, as well as maybe you have an ITSM tool like a Jira or a ServiceNow that you want to use that and have Security Hub feed up into that. It has the ability to do that as well. So now everything's looking good, right? We got our check boxes, everything's central and controlled, right? So feeling good. So now we have our landing zone, if you will. We have our availability zones in a given AWS. You feel good. It's been bootstrapped. You can kind of put your stamp on it, right? And say, hey, this is ready to rock and roll. If you deviate from any of the standards, we're going to catch you. We're going to see that, right? That's all well and good, right? But our job's not done yet because all we have is an empty environment with nothing running in it. At the end of the day, we need to deploy some stuff into that to get the value of the cloud. So first thing you want to deploy is compute, right? Albeit VMs, containers, serverless, you have to deploy something in there for your business logic. So this is where things can start changing, right? You have this environment and you give it access to someone, let your teams rock and roll, and they drop an environment in there. So now you have to ask yourself, right? How do I make sure my security is still good, right? I know I have this foundation built, but now all these applications up and running, is it still good, right? And this is where you need to partner with your CI/CD teams, right? To really make sure that plugging security controls into every life cycle of the deployments. I think I saw one of the questions earlier in there about adopting a good culture, if you will, right? And this is part of it. It's a lot to do with education. I think Roger mentioned that as well, right? Education is huge. You have to really educate your teams. Something like this, you want to think at the code level, right? A lot of your folks are probably deploying things with leveraging something you've heard, probably infrastructure as code, right? Albeit Terraform or possibly AWS CloudFormation. So are they integrating security into that infrastructure as code, into those templates, doing things like unit testing, integration testing? This is where they have to partner with the security team, work together, right? So a typical application, right? Consumers, mobile apps, websites out in the world, they have an edge layer, that compute layer, and storage layer, right? So if you start dropping some things in there, right, this is what it would look like. We may have the DDoS, right, from a shield and the WAFs deployed. So we know we're good there, but as they start deploying applications, developers, how are they handling things like consumer identity? Who's accessing the application? Are they using good IAM policies on that IAM, right? Because that's going to be outside of your IDP if these are third-party users. So that's where things like Cognito could potentially help. Secrets Manager to control passwords. At the end of the day, you just want to make sure they're really being good citizens, right? And that's, once again, education, explaining to those the dev teams and such the risk, right? What it means to the business and why it's so important to work together. They're most likely using continuous delivery pipelines for all their automation, right? So how do they understand what's important unless you educate them? Because at the end of the day, we can help there too, right? There's a lot of ways and a lot of tools to build pipelines and get security built in. At the end of the day, we want to catch that bad stuff up front. We don't want to just detect it, we want to protect it. So automation as part of the dev pipeline is crucial. And here are some tips to share. A lot of active links here, what you can do at each phase to put in security, right? From static code analysis, dynamic analysis, validating, encrypting, using IAM service to service roles. It's crucial, I feel like, to limit users and let the machines have control to talk to each other versus having people involved. At the end of the day, if you see something out of whack, you stop the pipeline right there, right, with detection methods. So now with this baseline, then you have your insertion of security into their pipelines. This is where you move from the DevOps to DevSecOps or SecOps. So now the VPC gets stamped, if you will. Our application's running in there. Everyone understands security. You leverage this account vending machine to make this a repeatable process by plugging it into the app team's pipelines. And where you have multiple controls, you can stamp their application. This is now secure. So at the end of the day, you should be able to answer with certainty, right, the status of your security on AWS with really one-click reporting, albeit Security Hub or whatever tool you're rolling Security Hub into. You should feel good about what you're deploying. I think that is, yeah, that's the last slide, Ron.